Hello and well met again. This is Laren with the Fantasy Grounds Academy. Today I'm going to show you a little bit of how you can write or have an assistant writer if you're going to create like one-shots or like homebrew content for your personal games. Cloud 3 by Anthropic is a pretty decent AI tool. I have to say, over ChatGPT and other AI generative tools, I think Claude 3 is definitely superior in writing. It does a really good job. It's really intelligent, and it really does make a difference in how quickly you can create content for your game. So this is just kind of like a show and tell, I guess, and kind of like maybe to inspire you to try some generative AI tools. A lot of it comes down to some experience and knowing what to ask. I think that's probably the biggest challenge if you're going to use AI tools. Also, you don't have a ton of control over what exactly the output is, but if you give AI the chance to look at your output requirements, like give it a template essentially, it can do a pretty good job giving you the type of output that you want. So Claude has basically allowed me to create tables, NPC stat blocks, writing story elements, and all sorts of really cool features. And it can go back and fix them, and you can ask for other types of text. But essentially, the theme here is this. It's like a one-shot adventure for 5e. And to be honest with you, I just got done with the artwork. So that's probably the first challenge, that if you're going to include tokens and handouts and maps and such, I would suggest doing that first. So in this case, I have some tokens that I put together using, I use ChatGPT to make the images, but essentially I can add those to Fantasy Grounds in the back end by clicking on the assets folder on the right hand side of Fantasy Grounds. And then once the assets come up, you can actually go back on the home page here and going to images. You can add your images to your campaign records in here. You won't necessarily have this folder until you do actually add images to it. This one already has it, but if you click on folder down here, that takes you to the back end. So what I'm going to do is go into my my Underdark work here that I've been doing, and I'll take this and actually add this in so that it's easier for me to access it while I'm in game, and I don't have to do this, all at once. So I'm going to take both of these folders, copy those, and paste them into this folder here, which is going to be my art folder. So this is all of the artwork that I imported, or I'm going to import. So these are just images that I generated for the story. So if you want to do something like that to make your games a little bit more interesting and have some more immersion, you can do stuff like that. You don't have to, but you might already have artwork that you've commissioned or that comes with your content. So this is the tokens that I made with the token stamp, and these come straight from the images. So what I'm going to do with these is take this entire folder, because it's not going to go in the images folder, and go back to the Underdark Adventures campaign. And there's a folder here called tokens. So I'm going to go into that folder. That won't exist until you actually add something to it. So if you come over to back to Fantasy Grounds and you click on tokens, you'll have to make a folder or go to the folder button here, and then it will take you to this back end. So in this case, I already had tokens in here, but I'm going to go ahead and click on paste and put the new ones in, and then close the back end. And then whenever you add images or move them or take them out or rename them, you need to use this refresh folder assets so that Fantasy Grounds will rescan and update your view. So I'll go ahead and hit this for a rescan. And when I go into the tokens area, here is the tokens that I added. So if I want to use those in this content, they're available to me. You may or may not use them. It'd be kind of a waste if you didn't, but sometimes you just don't find a use for them. We go to images, go to the campaign folder, This is the Underdark Heart, is what I call this adventure. And these are the handout images, previews for whatever content you have generated. So you can use this as a background image, or you can use this to share with your players, whatever you need to do to make this happen and to make it interesting for your group. So that's just the first step. And then when you want to add them to the campaign, you're going to come up to images, and I'm going to make another group here just so I have a separation here between the stuff I have loaded and the stuff that I'm building. So here's something that says Underdark Maps, but obviously this is not going to be a part of it. So this is something different. So I'm going to create a new category. Click on Edit, and I'll call this Underdark Heart, just so I have a title or a working category. And essentially it's a crystal mine in the Underdark, which I had used earlier today when I was doing a kind of a combat tracker sort of tips type thing. So I'm using that same session that I was working at. And this is an ongoing thing where you can keep building in a work campaign. So this would not be something that I'd be playing in. This is more or less my testing field and also where I create content. And once I'm done, I'll export it and load it into an actual game session. That way it doesn't get convoluted, mixed up, everything gets all jumbled up if you try to build in the same campaign that you're working in. If you're only going to do a couple little things, no big deal. But if you're going to do a lot of stuff, you definitely want to create a different campaign and build in there and then export it, because as your campaign grows, it gets more and more unwieldy, and you kind of start painting yourself into a corner, meaning that you don't have a lot of flexibility with how you're going to organize and use the data, and then you'll double up and all kinds of weird stuff. So you don't want to load a exported module in the same folder that you're working in. So that's a very important thing to know if you're going to build a lot of extra content. If you're adding a couple tokens or something, who cares, right? Or editing a few things. But when you really start getting into it and building your own homebrew content, it's important to have that separation. And you'll find out sooner or later, if you're building content now, is you'll kind of go, wow, this is a lot of work. And on top of that, it's all mixed up and links are broken, and it can be a real mess really quick. So that's just a word of advice. So now that I have that section created, I'm going to get out of the edit mode, and this is called Underdark Heart. So I have this group selected here. You can click on Create from Campaign Assets, which will pull in everything at once. I wouldn't do that unless you have all of your artwork labeled in the folders you want them in and detailed to where everything's in. If you don't, then you want to do it onesie twosies. You can do it that way and just drag these into this folder. And last but not least, you can also import images if you need to in interface. There's an import button on the bottom, which will navigate you to wherever folders your stuff is, and you can import them that way. But in this case, I'm just going to already have them in the campaign folder, but they're not actually part of the game yet until I actually add them to the images. So this will make it so they can be shareable and that sort of thing. So if you click on Create from Campaign Assets, that's going to pull everything from your art folder into whatever group you've set up, or it'll go to unlisted or uncategorized if you don't create a group. So in this case, I'm going to take these, and I don't really know exactly what I have in my folder, so I'm just going to drag these one at a time. And what this will do is add them to the campaign record, and they're now a part of this campaign for the game or for the content you're building. So these are just all the images that I would share or use when I'm building this particular one-shot. So here's the Crystal Cavern Mines kind of picture. And if I expand this out, this is basically the image that I could share with players. You can add fog to it. You can do all kinds of cool stuff. So if you wanted to add like a mist to this, you could. By selecting the images, just so I have this selected. You don't have to, but that's just a practice that I have. But if you're going to add an effect, you want to come down here and add an effect layer. which will sit on top of this image essentially because it's elevated above here in the tree. And then what we do is click on the effects button and use the drop down. And essentially you can use clouds. This is kind of something that they went over, I think yesterday when Bryce was doing some stuff, he was showing how you could do this. So this is a kind of a cool trick, and it just kind of gives you that movement, and it kind of brings the picture alive, so it's not so boring and static. The other thing you can do is you can offset this a little bit, and what I'm going to do is turn up the blur a little bit. And if you don't want this effect all over the background, you can actually add a mask and then left click and drag this area here, so it's only going to show up there and not over the entire window. So, and then you can also make it to where it's only showing up in this little spot or whatever. So this is going to kind of isolate where exactly this effect is going to be shown. So you can do that too. So you just add a mask and then you unveil whatever parts that you want to show through. And then you use a little bit of blur to kind of blur the edges so that it's not a distinct line. And this is helpful if you like trace a small area and then you want it to blend in with the background. So that's just an example of the types of things you can do with your handouts. And what's kind of cool about this is when I go to build the adventure, I can link that image in there and sort of have like a kind of like an introductory image for the adventure. So to make this campaign, you want to go to your books over here on the right, and then you click on campaign, and it will pop up this book campaign window, which is kind of like your starting point or when you're getting ready to enter your data. So for the new chapter, I'm probably going to put in the title that it was given to me through Cloud 3. I used 3 or 4 different titles and kind of came up with this kind of generic type. I wouldn't say generic, but it's kind of a sort of cliche, I guess. But it's called Crystal Heart of the Underdark. So it's essentially a one-shot adventure, and it's going to be for levels, basically for lower levels like 3 to 4. And the way I set it up, or way I envisioned it, is that if you have 5 players, they'll all be level 3. If you have 4 players, they can be level 4. And that's to kind of balance the adventure out and make it a little bit more survivable. And you got to remember it's a one-shot, so that diversity thing kind of goes out the door because you're only going to play it once, and you'll probably never touch it again. Although, if this is your your main campaign and it's like a one shot, then you might use it more than once. So you have to kind of consider that. So I'm just kind of putting in these headers up here. I'm going to bring in my zoom and then dismiss the yellow circle for right now. And we'll see what we get here. So let's get this. Okay, so this is basically where I'm entering the data for the header, and then this is a subchapter like header here. So you could have the title and then a subheader. So what I might do here is, instead of doing this, I might put in intro instead. So that way I know kind of what this is all about. So this is going to be the intro, and then we're going to add a new page. So this gives you the flexibility of what you want to put in here, what type of images or the formatting you want. So in this case, this top part, I'm going to put the stinger in here, which is kind of like the lead into the advertisement kind of thing for this particular adventure. So we'll call this a stinger. And then for this first section here, I'm going to click on the header block, and we'll call this what is that? The Crystal Heart of the Underdark, stinger or something like that. That way we have like kind of like a title. And then I'm going to take this and make an image block. And then you do is that all your images that you've set up, you can drag and drop those in here and make those, and you could scale it up or down. And in this case, that's pretty good to just leave it at that. Crystal Cavern Mines, that's fine. And then what you can do here is decide what type of text block you want underneath this. So in this case, I'm just going to do a single text block, and then I'm going to copy and paste the data from Anthropic, from the AI tool, and this is going to be the stinger. So here is the stinger, and this is kind of like a little lead-in to the adventure to kind of get people interested in playing. And this is all essentially just copy and paste. Once you have all your text inside of Fantasy Grounds, it will keep the formatting. But coming from the outside and going into Fantasy Grounds, it doesn't always keep your formatting, like the bold and italics and all that sort of thing. So what I'm going to do here is edit this text and then take all this stuff out that I don't want. Just highlight it, delete it. Maybe take this and make it a header. So I'll hit Control-2 after highlighting the text. And then here's the bold part. And then here's the actual stinger. So it says, beneath the world you know, where darkness holds sway and ancient secrets lie buried, a power pulses with untold potential. Drawn by whispers of a legendary artifact, your party is hired to plumb the treacherous depths of the Underdark, where glittering caverns hide deadly perils. In this high-stakes dungeon delve, you'll navigate twisting tunnels that shimmer with arcane energies. Face off against the denizens of the deep and unravel puzzles left by long-forgotten civilizations. But you're not alone in your quest. Rival factions converge, each seeking to claim the Crystal Heart for their own nefarious purposes. As you descend into the abyss, the very air thrums with tension. Will you unlock the secrets of the Crystal Heart and escape the collapsing caverns, or will you become another lost tale of the Underdark? The depth awaits, adventurer. Do you dare seek the heart of darkness? So it's kind of like a lead-in type thing that I developed based off of the context of the adventure. So this is just kind of preliminary stuff that you might get into when you're writing. So this will help kind of bring this story alive, kind of bring it up, and maybe inspire people to want to run it. So that's part of the reason to have that stinger. Essentially, you don't even really have to have that, but if you want to sell this commercially or you want it to, do well, maybe you'll do something like that to make it stand out. So that's just kind of like the first page, right? And then what we'll do is maybe we'll create another page, and this one will be maybe an index. So this will be the index, which will give us the full kind of layout of how we want this to go. And then we might take and just put a text block to create the index. And once we add that, then we'll copy and paste the index. So I don't think you can see this very well, but I'll bring this over so you can see the actual context of this. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to ask it to build an index. So this is Claude 3, by the way. Anthropic's AI tool. It's really good for writing. I find that ChatGPT is more useful overall because you can do images and all kinds of different things, but Anthropic, I think text and data analysis is where it really shines. So I'm going to say, please create, I don't have to say please, but it's a habit. Please create a detailed index of the adventure and any add-on content. So it's going to look back. So it says, please create a detailed image of the adventure. Okay, so I'll say look back at our previous conversations. So this is something I do to make it kind of recourse through everything, and then it'll actually go back and kind of categorize everything. And I have stuff kind of in a jumble, so I'm trying to kind of, basically organize this so I have an idea of how I want to work. So yeah, so there's the appendices. It's building the additional content. So I made a GM's crib sheet There's some maps that it's basically it's taking the liberty of telling me that maybe I should put that in there. I don't have those maps, but I'll find something. So here's the index. So we can take this and copy and paste it and put it into Fantasy Grounds um, just for building the index, which really helps because then you can kind of organize your work and you can kind of basically focus on the things that are important at the time. So I'll go ahead and open up Fantasy Grounds, and here in the text box I'm going to hit Control V as in Victor, and that's going to give us this nice little index here. And now what I'm going to do is just do a little formatting. So this up here is going to be, I guess you can say this is the header block or like bold. And then you got your introduction, which I would probably make that bold. Here's chapter 1, and then chapter 2, chapter 3, so on and so forth. So you get the idea. So you can really do a lot of work in a short amount of time if you're able to harness the capabilities of a tool like this. You don't have to do this. You can just type it all out yourself, but I'm telling you, this is the way to go for a personal private game that you might want to run for your friends. And it really does make a big difference when you're trying to create content. It's not as the Anthropic, the Cloud 3, doesn't have as much overhead, I notice, as ChatGPT. So if you want to use it for just writing, that's what I recommend it for. I mean, it can do other stuff too, but honestly, I think writing is probably its greatest asset, like what it does best. It's just really good writing tool. It has some intelligence behind it, capabilities. It's quick. I can't say enough about it. It works pretty good. I would say in favor of Cloud 3 for writing over ChatGPT. ChatGPT does okay, but it really lacks that humanization. Cloud 3 kind of has a little bit more of a human feel to it. And also, it's very thorough and very detailed and powerful. So it's really good. All right, so this is just the kind of like the steps that I'm going to go through to develop. So imagine I want to start with this adventure overview and the background lore and the adventure hook. So this would kind of depend on how much or how large it's going to be. So I'd probably just take this intro and put it on one page. So instead of trying to reinvent the wheel here, I'm just going to take these 3 parts and put them into one page. And it really kind of depends on how much content. Like if these are long, drawn out things, I might make those 3 separate pages. But in this case, I'm going to make a new subchapter, and we're going to call this the introduction. And then we'll make a new page. And this is where we're going to put our sections for the content. So I want to go back to the Anthropic thing here. And here's the mines. Let's see. Let's go back to this. And what we can do here is go back. I try not to go too far out because it's really difficult to backtrack all through all this data. So it kind of helps if you do this in steps when you're prompting it and kind of doing it in real time, because as you can see, I've got like a gazillion different entries here, and that's going to be difficult to go back through, wading through all this stuff to figure out where I want to pull the data from. So instead of doing this, what I might do is just prompt it to rewrite the intro. So, and then I notice I have my message cap. You have 10 messages remaining until 7 p.m. So it does have a message cap. This is a paid version, by the way, but it does have a message cap depending on what you're using. The free version works just as well. It's just that you have less iterations that you can do. So just keep that in mind. Kind of keep them short and sweet, or ask the questions carefully so you're not having to ask it 10 times for the same thing. So rather than doing that, I'll just go back and and scroll up into my initial notes, which are all the way up here. And this is essentially the overview that I started with, and then it created some stat blocks, and it was kind of going to town here. It was really interesting in the beginning because it was kind of all over the place, but now that I have some kind of idea of how this is going to flow, then I can basically use this. So here's a detailed description of the crystalline caverns with implications of ancient mining activity. So this could be something that you might use to use for the GM, and you can also paraphrase this if you want. So it's like the intro. So we can copy that information and then go back into Fantasy Grounds and use that information to give us what type of data that we want to present. So what we'll do is I'll put the intro here, and then what we'll do is, let's see, intro, and then I'm going to take a stat or text block and paste this in here. So here's a detailed, so I don't need that part. Get rid of that. That's part of the prompt. This is kind of describing what this is. Okay, so what we'll do is put introduction, maybe, we'll see. And then let me go back to my zoom level here so you can kind of see what I'm working on. So just kind of going through this, it says, as you enter the vast network of crystalline caverns, you are immediately struck by the otherworldly beauty surrounding you. The walls, ceiling, and even parts of the floor are encrusted with crystals of various sizes and colors. They range from tiny, needle-like formations to massive, room-spanning structures that jut out at odd angles. The air is cool and dry with a faint mineral scent. Your footsteps echo softly, occasionally accompanied by the gentle tinkling of disturbed crystal fragments. The natural illumination is dim but mesmerizing. The crystals seem to capture and amplify what little light there is, creating a soft, ever-shifting glow that dances across the cavern walls. That's some really good writing. As you explore further, you notice ancient signs of activity. Smooth, unnatural, flat surfaces interrupt the crystalline growths in places, hinting at long ago mining operations. Here and there, you spot the faded outlines of tunnels that have been reclaimed by the crystal formations. So it's been a while since someone's been there. Rusty remnants of old mining equipment, picks, carts, and pulley systems lie half buried under the crystal deposits and cave debris. So at one time, somebody was trying to mine the area. In some areas, the floor is unnaturally level, suggesting it once a heavily trafficked pathway. Weathered marks on some larger crystal formations could be from climbing gear or attempts at extraction. The caverns occasionally open into larger chambers where the ceiling soars upwards, forming cathedral-like spaces filled with stalactites and stalagmites, many of which are partially or fully crystallized. Water has played its part in shaping these caverns as well. Small underground streams wind their way through the lower areas, their surfaces reflecting the crystalline glow above. In places, these streams have carved smooth channels through the crystal-laden rock, creating miniature glittering canyon-like. That's pretty cool. The deeper you go, the more intense the crystal formations become. Some chambers are almost crystalline, like entirely, with a geometric pattern spiraling across every surface. It's in these deeper areas that you notice larger, clearer areas where the crystals seem to have been systematically removed, leaving behind evidence of careful extraction techniques long lost to time. So they don't even know how these guys got this stuff out of here. The crystalline labyrinth is both beautiful and treacherous, a glittering maze that holds secrets of its ancient past, waiting to be uncovered by those brave or curious enough to explore its depths. So you could take this information here and kind of codify it here and make it like text. That you can share with your players if you want to send this to the chat. So I'm going to highlight this first paragraph and hit Control 4. Oops, wrong one. I think it's Control 3. Yeah, Control 3. And I'm going to do that for the rest of these, so you can paraphrase this. You don't have to include every single one of these when you're reading this aloud. You can kind of reveal parts of it as you get into the adventure, and this will give you that capability of sending it to the chat. So in this case, this bubble here is going to send this text over to the chat area for your players. So if I click on this little bubble, it sends that over here into the chat. This is more like narration without any sort of indicator as to who or what is saying this. But if you want that, if you want this to say GM, or maybe it's a player or something, you hit Control Tab, which gives you this little dot here, and then you're going to put GM there. And what that does is it sets a speaker. So now when I send it over, it sends it over as the GM saying this, like a quote. So you can do this in different ways. You can either have it like this real generic narration, or you can have it set as this kind of text bubble where it's actually the game master saying this. So I'm going to do that for all of these, hit Control Tab, and just go down this list and do that for every one of these. And you can do this as you go, or I'd like doing it all at once so I don't have to come back and keep switching between the tools, because that's really where you lose time. So that, and then I'm using the arrow key to get the cursor over. And this will help speed up your process once you understand those shortcuts. It's Control 1 through 6. They all have different functions. And generally speaking, once you understand those and what they do, it makes this process a lot quicker. So there you go. So this is like intro stuff that you can use to introduce your characters to the environment. And it kind of gives you some idea of what the location is. And if you watched my earlier video, we have a map here that I was using earlier that kind of mirrors this type of setting. So I can come up here and zoom to fit, and this is kind of the gist of this. I turn off the line of sight so you can see it more. So this is kind of like the crystalline caverns that we're describing here. And what's really neat is I took this image and I put it in ChatGPT and I said, hey, make some images based off the colors and the motifs, the designs of this map. So it took it and it kind of gave me a description, and it made some of those images that I was showing you earlier. So it was inspired by the image. So just having that alone really helps kind of bring everything together. And then what I did is I dumped the text from this into Anthropic, the Claude 3, and that started making the adventure, and it kind of built it on this map. So it built the whole adventure just on one map. And it's really just you may not need the map for the entire adventure, but there are spots in here where you could easily link that up with descriptions and fix it and add things as you go. So if you wanted to at this point, you might end up sharing this as an image to the party straight away. So it depends on where you come in or where this comes in, but I probably wouldn't put it in the intro. More than likely I would put it in the next chapter, but this is kind of a choice thing that you have to make, like what's important to you. So that's the read aloud is kind of what we'll put here. So this is like your read aloud section. And then we'll do something like that. So we have a kind of clear definition here. So there's your header. Now what I'm going to do is probably create another text block. And this one will have the GM notes. So what I'm going to do is go back to Anthropic. And in here in the prompt area, I'm going to say, please summarize the entirety of the one-shot adventure into a comprehensive GM intro and notes. I'm going to say include an overview, level requirements, etc. And what's kind of nice about most of these AI tools is if you have a couple spelling errors, it generally knows what you're saying. So I'm going to have it do this, and I'll basically have it taken. It will give me a nice little intro so that I can. This will be for the GM. And then this kind of gives you a breakdown for the adventure, and it gives you more of a way to get prepped, and it has all kinds of cool little notes here. All right, so take this data here, and we're going to put this in Fantasy Grounds. So here's the GM introduction and overview. So we have kind of like the read aloud that we can share with the players as they go through this area or when they start. And then we have the GM notes, which will be helpful for the game master when they're running the adventure. And as you can see, it kind of kept all the spacing in here, which I don't mind so much. But if you want to remove that spacing, you can right click, go to clean up text, and that'll get rid of the spaces, and you can put in your own spacing. And then here I'm going to do this Control 2, which makes that a bold title or a header. And then that's going to be bold. And then you have your kind of like your parameters here, your estimated play time, so on and so forth. So this is just a way for you to organize the information and kind of set it up like a real, like a real product. And then here's what goes into this. So these might be bulleted points. So you can hit Control 3, I think. Nope, Control 4, excuse me. Control Z will get you out. Control 4 is a bullet point. So you can do this to kind of get you organized here. And then this one is going to be, I think, let's make that one that, and then Control 4. So it really helps learning those shortcuts, because this would take a lot longer if you had to right click on every single one of these to add this in. It's okay for like one thing, but when you're making stuff, that really sucks. Okay, so what I'm saying is if you right click and you go to paragraph types, you can set that here, but it just makes way too much work if you've got all this stuff that you're working on. It's better to learn those shortcuts. Control B, and they are detailed on the Fantasy Grounds Atlassian. So if you're wondering what I'm talking about, look up the text formatting, and you'll find it in the either on the forums, or you'll find it in the basic of the Fantasy Grounds. I guess you could say a manual for the basic stuff. It's not rule set specific, so it'd be in the manual for the overall interface. There is a manual, believe it or not, and not many of us look at it, unfortunately. But it doesn't tell you how to use the program. It just kind of shows you what's what. You have to kind of make that interpretation on how it's useful to you. I think it does okay with identification and kind of explaining what buttons are and stuff, but they do vary between rule sets. So that's why it's not as useful until you start getting into a specific rule set. Then you learn all the little nuances and that sort of thing. But this is kind of just organizing this sort of data for this adventure. So if you wanted to publish something like this, you'd have a pretty good organizational thing here. Okay, so that's basically the majority of this is, having this stuff laid out for you and having it organized. So I want to take this stuff and put these, oops, I did it again. Okay, so 4, Yeah, so this kind of organizing the information. That's kind of important when it comes to when you want to run a game and stuff. This goes a long ways. It's a lot of work up front. I'm not going to lie, it's a lot of work, but it does pay off in the long run because then you know the content intimately. You're not fumbling around looking for stuff, and you already kind of have an idea of how. Oh, AI RPG, what does this mean? It means that all I'm doing is using AI to assist in writing. That's all. So um, it's not really role playing per se, but it's helping me develop content for role playing games. So that's what it means. It's not running the game. I don't think we're there yet. I don't think the AI is quite ready for that, but it's close. So this is, let's see. No. This is just a assistive tool that I'm using to format text. So it's essentially, just a tool to help me build content. But I imagine in the future that once this AI stuff gets, yeah, I hear you. Yeah, but I imagine once this AI stuff takes off, they're going to start incorporate. I mean, not just Fantasy Grounds, but all of the virtual tabletops will start incorporating this type of thing because then you can have um, diverse NPCs that change and evolve with the adventure. All kinds of possibilities there. So it's not all bad, but hey, Dan, what's up? Yeah, so that it has some good merits to it, but I can see where people would be like, "No, I'm not doing that. I don't want Skynet on my computer." It's kind of ignorant, but at the same time, I can understand the concern for sure. So let's see. Okay, so this is just notes here. So I'm just going to do Control B for these because it's just a kind of notations as to. Okay. So all this is doing is just organizing the information, and that's all we're doing here. It's really just kind of making it so it's easier to run it. And just to give people an overview. So this says the Crystal Heart of the Underdark is a thrilling adventure that takes players deep into the treacherous depths of the Underdark, hired by Thordak Ironheart, a dwarven merchant. The party must navigate crystalline caverns, face Duergar occupiers, and uncover the secrets of an ancient Svirfneblin civilization, all while the sinister presence of mind flayers looms in the shadows. So it's pretty epic in regards to the scope, but the mind flayers are more, in this case, not necessarily supposed to be a threat, like direct threat. It's supposed to be kind of like a overtone and a way to kind of segue into other adventures. So it's really not about mind flayers. Those just happen to be like the background bad. So you're going to explore the crystalline cavern system. It's a blend of combat, stealth, and puzzle solving. So you kind of have the three pillars there of exploration, role play a little bit. I don't think this is really set around role playing, but I do have some really cool dialogue to share with you. Let's see. So dynamic environment with magical effects, climatic battle, and escape sequence. So those are the main elements. The structure is you receive the quest, you go through the Underdark with skill challenges and stuff. You explore the crystal caverns, and you will look at environmental hazards and puzzles. You'll infiltrate the Duergar outpost with stealth or combat or both. Navigate the inner sanctum, which has a major puzzle and a boss fight. And then you retrieve a crystal and escape, which are more skill challenges. So that's kind of how it rolls out. And this is supposed to be for 4 to 6 hours. So roughly, and I did specify that, I wanted to play in less than 6 hours. And that does kind of help with the scale and scope of how it's going to write this adventure. To be honest with you, though, I think this would be more like a two-shot. With the amount of stuff that it's for it, it to me is like a mini adventure more than a one-shot. But, it only has a few locations. So I don't think it's overwhelming, but it may be a little much to do in one session. Depends on how much time you have and what the situation is. If I was running this at a convention, like a paid kind of, game or something, that'd definitely run the whole 6 hours. But if it's running it for my friends, I'd probably do it in 2 or 3 chapters, so we only have to play for 2 to 3 hours at a time. That way it's not overwhelming. And so we have our key NPCs here. We have Grim Shadow. We have the Mind Flayer Overseer. Those are the main NPCs. There's others. And the major challenges is you got the crystal bridge puzzle, which is kind of cool. You have to focus these crystals in order to get the bridge to work. You have to infiltrate the dwarven Duergar outpost. There's a gnomish rune puzzle where you have to go in and decipher this rune. You battle against Grim Shadow and the Crystal Guardians. There's a elemental that can show up. And what I did is I have it scaled or set up to where if you have a lower level party, then you have lower level stuff, so on and so forth. So there's a couple options. And then I made NPCs in case you want to introduce someone to help them or someone to hinder. So there's a Drow spy that shows up that isn't really in the adventure unless you need him. And then you might end up fighting him or he might become an ally. It just depends. So you have all these contingencies in case. And you don't have to do that. It's a lot of extra work. But when you do have it, it's nice because you can just go. You can just keep playing. You don't have to sit and worry about what's prepared, what isn't done. And, you don't have very much stuff covered in a lot of adventures. So it's nice when you can do your own thing and put the information you think that's important to you. Because I know I've played a lot of adventures, and the stuff they focus on is a lot of stuff I don't need. I need to know, like, why is the treasure in here? I don't care if it's a bar of gold or whatever it is, but why is it in the dungeon? That sort of stuff. And that's the kind of things that are missing a lot, and you have to make that up on the fly. But if you got a little bit of prep into it, it makes it a lot easier. So there's some adventure hooks here. A missing person case leading to the caverns, investigation of strange seismic activity in the area, and a rival adventure party challenging the PCs to retrieve the crystal first. So there's 3 different ways that you can introduce the adventure, and those are just ideas. You don't have to use those. But the primary hook is Thordak Ironheart's job offer. But you can use those alternatives in case you don't want that, because that's very cliche. Like, you go to a tavern, he gives you a job, you go to you don't have to have that. You can use the missing persons, investigation of the natural phenomena, or even the case of a rival party. So this will make it more interesting and more diverse. One of the things I try to do with one-shots is make them with the higher replay value. That way it doesn't get too boring for you, and it can turn out a little different each time. So it kind of depends on how you write it and why you're writing it and the type of effort and time you want to put into it, which is really the real kicker. So this is just the intro. So let's see what else our index says here. So we have the adventure hooks, the background lore, adventure overview. So that's kind of all that stuff there. And okay, so I want to actually detail the adventure hooks a little bit more. I don't like it when they're so vague that you're just going to have to always come up with something. I don't mind having it listed like that so that you can kind of make it up as you go. But I'm also going to detail the adventure hooks for the crib sheet, which is another piece of this adventure that I'm really adamant about. It's like 1 page full of a bunch of stuff that's helpful for the GM. It kind of comes down to how you want to organize it, but essentially it has all the critical information and then some. So it's kind of like a cheat sheet, but it's tied in with the adventure and it's separate, so you can use it optionally and you don't get overwhelmed, because if you include it in the adventure, it'll be too much, way too much stuff. So I always make myself a little side note there, and it can be pretty big. Sometimes my side notes are larger than the adventure itself. So it just depends on what you're trying to achieve and your goals. All right, so that's that part of it. So let's take a look at the index. So Journey into the Underdark. Okay, so this is just mostly adventure. And then, like I said, you have conclusions here. And here's your appendices, so you can do these stat blocks, and here's all the different stat blocks for this adventure. So you have the different types of NPCs, and then also we have some hazards. So here is the hazards. I think what I'll do is I'm gonna bold these sections here because they are separate. And then what I'll do is put a space in there. That way to kind of separate it out. So it's kind of a formatting thing. And then there's some rollable tables. So let's talk about this because this has the rumors. So this is something that really helps with creating content. And this is just a rollable list rumor table thing that I would use near the beginning of the adventure. So if I go back to the AI tool, Anthropic, and bring that up, and we'll see what it brings us. So there are some tables up here. Yeah, I'm lazy, so I'm gonna have it redo the intro. Let's see. There is a kind of like a table here that I have set up. Okay, so here's the list of rumors. Then they're formatted in regards to this particular. It's kind of like vague rumors. They're not really particularly focused on the plot of the adventure. They're just random stuff that might come up in conversation or part of your lead in. So this is a 6 result rollable list. So I'm going to copy this data, and this is in a format that'll make it a little easier to paste into Fantasy Grounds. So all it is text, and you have your 1d6 with a pipe, and then results. So that's the header. This is the title, and then these results are like just however you want the range to be. And if you have an odd number, you can just say roll again. Like if you only had 5 results, but it's a D6, you can ask it to just put in roll again or something like that. But in this case, they're all 6 of them are there. So what I'm going to do is take this data, copy it, and then go into Fantasy Grounds. And in the tables area, you can essentially take that and import it into Fantasy Grounds. This should be universal to most rule sets. So it isn't just 5e. So this functionality does exist in most campaign or in most rule sets in Fantasy Grounds. So if you go to the campaign and you go to tables, I'm going to create another group here. So clicking on this, hit the edit, and we're going to call this Underdark Heart Tables. Yeah, my typing sucks. And that's another reason I use these tools, because I'm not a good typer. I'm just never really, as much as I use a computer, I'm surprised that I'm still hunting and pecking because it slows me down. I'm going to really have to knuckle down and get that figured out, because that's a skill, and it's something that's required when you do a lot of writing, and it really slows me down quite a bit. All right, so now once you have your group set up, there's an import text, which is this little hamburger menu. And here's your parameters and your settings. So I'm going to paste that data, which is the header and then all of the lines. And you can see they're all on separate lines. And then I can take the table name, which is what we had before. So in this case, this is the Crystal Cavern Rumors. You take that and come up here, hit Control V. And now we're going to actually, instead of leaving it as simple, we're going to go to delimited. That's this these separators and such. So we're going to use a pipe. The data type is delimited. That means it has the separator in here. And then the column headers in the first row, yes. Column table ranges in the first column, yes. So this is the defining what this data is. So when you import it, it just does it. A simple one wouldn't have all this numbering and stuff. You would just have separate lines. In this case, though, I have numbers and a separator and then the data. And the reason we use pipes is so that if there's a sentence and it has a comma in there, it's not going to create another column, because that's what will happen. It'll break it up. We don't want that. So that's why I use the pipe, because it's less likely that that's going to be used in a sentence or in text that you're going to copy and paste. So click import, and that should pull that in. Yep, so here's the rumor list. And what's nice about this is you can actually just pick something or roll. So if you're uncertain or you don't know what to do, you can actually link this on the back of an NPC and then roll this table when information or when topics come up about the mines. So this would be something you might use in the beginning of the adventure or when you run into an NPC. So let's roll, let's see what it does. Yep. So the rumor here is result number 5. It says rare mushrooms growing near the cavern entrance are said to grant vivid prophetic dreams. So it's just a kind of a random sort of information that's not really going to give away the plot. Let's see. Number 4. An old hermit swears he saw shadowy figures moving among the crystal formation. So maybe I might reword that, say an old retired miner instead of a hermit. It's supposedly he lives, in the town, but maybe he's an old miner. So I might change that a little, but just so it has a little bit more lore friendly. So he might be in the tavern or outside in the town, and he says that at one point when he was mining, he may have saw some shadowy figures moving through there. So this might be a guy that's long since retired. Maybe he went on an expedition and they were looking at the mines. But anyhow, that's just some preliminary stuff. So I don't always agree with the content that's written. I have to go in and read it, and that way I have to go back and update it. Sometimes when you use generative AI, it starts losing sense. It loses direction. It becomes kind of stupid after a while, like it just forgets everything. So that's when you start running into your token length. And when you do too much, you're going to run into that. So what I recommend you doing is one-shots are pretty safe, but if you're going to do a large campaign or an entire setting, do it in sections. So make your outline and then work each piece of that outline and then bring it together. Because if you try to make it too big and do everything at once in one session in your AI tool, it's gonna start screwing up, and it's gonna piss you off, and it's not gonna give you what output you're looking for. And eventually it's gonna start forgetting who, when, why, where. Once that happens, it sucks. Then you have to go back, copy and paste the data, and try to get it back on track. And that really takes a lot of time. So do yourself a favor and work on these in chunks. The context size is a lot bigger than it used to be. Way better. About a year ago I was doing this, it sucked. It's way better, especially these tools like Anthropic really has a big, large capacity compared to ChatGPT. But after a while, it did start screwing up. It starts to exaggerate, and it just doesn't make sense after a while. And you have to keep retraining it on the data that you're giving it. At that point, you're almost better off just starting over, because it just will drive you nuts. So start small, make your index and your outline, and then work each section. And then if you have to, build all your NPCs in one part, build all your loot in another part, build all your dialogue, so on and so forth. So I'm just going to kind of go through some more of the Anthropic stuff, but you kind of get the idea that you can use this kind of tool to make this content creation a little bit quicker and a lot less tedious than starting from scratch and not having a starting point. If you were to do this without nothing and you were just, even if you knew how to use the program, it's just going to take a while. And if you don't have any content and you're typing it, everything in Fantasy Grounds, you're in for a long haul. So usually I work outside of Fantasy Grounds and I'll paste it in there and then mess around with the formatting. I don't normally write in Fantasy Grounds unless it's something small or short. Usually I do all the planning outside of Fantasy Grounds because there's some functionality, some formatting tools and such that, like find and replace and all those kinds of things. So I would use a bona fide text editor such as Notepad++ if you're really going to do some serious work. But this is kind of helps me organize my thoughts, and I can just take a theme and run with it. I took that image of the map and asked it to describe it, and then I took that description and I asked it to make some images, and then it just kind of snowballed from there into this one-shot adventure. Heck, I even did a little tutorial today on combat with it. So it really helps to have these type of tools, especially like for homebrew. So I was using this today to show how to move tokens around and use the combat tracker. So it was a lot of fun. So this is another way you can test your content. So not only am I building this, but I'm also play testing stuff in it. So it kind of helps you, keeps you inspired. And that's what you need to get you through. You need inspiration. You need maybe a little music, or take a break and run a little encounter and see how it works. That way you don't get burned out. Because doing this all day long for hours on end is really taxing. And you kind of want to break it up if you can. So this is basically how you can put this kind of stuff together. There are import tools in Fantasy Grounds to make this easier. So in the 5th edition rule set, there is an NPC import tool, which I use all the time. And I have a section here, Underdark NPCs, and these are things that I had must have made long ago. But I'd probably use the same group because I have all these drow in here, so that might be useful. But I'll make a new section, and this will be the Underdark Heart NPCs. So this is just a header, the way to get separation. And now I go down. Here's my new group, Underdark Heart. There we go. So now you can do the same thing. You can import with this tool here. So the key is, though, is that the formatting has to be correct. And that's where a lot of people have frustration. And I did the same thing. I had to make a case study out of this just to get to the point where I was competent enough to understand what needs to happen. And then using AI kind of sped that up. So now instead of making a copy of an NPC and kind of monkeying around with that, I'll just do it this way. And you get a nice summary. So let me grab a stat block from Anthropic, and let's see what it looks like. So there are NPCs that Anthropic made, which turned out really nice. I mean, they're beautiful. They're formatted correctly. So here's the Grim Shadow. This is one of the big bosses, so one of the key NPCs. So this is the information here. You can copy and paste this in. But I know I made another iteration of it later on because I noticed that they were missing a lot of the background stuff that I wanted to put on these. So I think I had to redo them because of that. And I even made this thing for knowledge, for breakdowns for the adventure. So if you have a drow or a dwarf or a deep gnome in your party, here are some knowledge that they may already have. And these are based off of challenge ratings and stuff. So I have this all set. So if stone cutting trait grants advantage on these checks related to stone. So if you have a deep gnome in your group, a Sverflablin, knowledge might be, a basic check, nature or survival, natural affinity for the cavern environment, providing advantage on navigation checks, basic knowledge of crystal formations and their potential magical properties. But then as you get better, or the rolls get better, awareness of typical Duergar outpost layouts and defensive strategies, and recognition of Sverflablin craftsmanship in older parts of the cavern. So you can really go down the rabbit hole on this. But this is the crystal elemental. Okay, we'll use this for an example. This is a unique creature for this setting. So copy this, go into Fantasy Grounds, and you can paste it in there. This doesn't have the lore, but it doesn't really need it. This is an elemental. So you might put some tactics, and you might put a little bit of background, like how they were made. But in general, this NPC is not as complex as like one that's more like a character. So this information in the back might be a little bit less or a little more, depending on the NPC. So this thing here, I might just kind of bone it and just say, don't worry about it, just let it go. Or I can go back to Anthropic and say, look, I want a better NPC stat block that includes the other information, so like the lore and such. So I can go into here, copy this, paste it into here, and then ask it, let's see, please provide the extra information like lore, appearance, tactics, etc. So you might do something like that to make your encounters more memorable and useful to you. So this might help you run the game. It might add more grief, who knows. Please provide the tactics or the basic, let's see, please provide the extra information like lore, tactics, that sort of thing. We'll see what it does. Sometimes it's a crapshoot. You don't know what you're going to get. Oh, here we go. So it's giving me some stuff here. Nice. So this information could be on the back side of the information on the stat block. So you even have adventure hooks on the back just for the creature, which is kind of cool. I don't know if I'd include it, but it's there. So copy that information, go back to Fantasy Grounds, and in this area, this would be the non-stat block information. So I'm going to right click, clean up those spaces, and then do a little bit of formatting and then import it. So here's the appearance, here's the lore, here's the behavior, here's tactics, like how does it fight and stuff. So role-playing notes, encounter tips, and then adventure hooks. So, I mean, we just took a basic NPC and just expanded the heck out of it. Now it has a lot more to it, and it's basically more robust at this point when you have more information. You could even put loot, like if you defeat this guy, like how much crystals you get out of it, like if you want to harvest and put all that stuff in there. But now that we have all that info, the main thing that gets messed up on these, and I'm going to magnify this to show you. If you remember this, you'll probably be okay in most cases. So when you copy and paste stat blocks from other sources like websites and PDFs, they're never in the right format. I mean, rarely. The only exception to that is another stat block in Fantasy Grounds that you can edit, or if you use D&D Beyond. Other than that, I haven't found very many publishers or authors that keep to the correct format to make this parsing work properly. So F12, and then I need to get rid of, I'm going to get rid of the cursor thingy. All right, so normally in here is where it's broken. So you have your strength, dex, con, intelligence, wisdom, charisma. This should all be on one line. And then underneath there, with just a space in between, are the scores. That is generally broken every single time. Even with using generative AI, this is always busted. I don't know why, but every time I ask for an NPC stat block, I have to correct it and ask it to do it like this. And then once it understands what I want, then it does it. But for some reason, even if I tell it ahead of time, Unless I give it a template, it's always going to do, like, it'll have like strength with the 20 after it, dex with the 10. It does it that way, or it'll do it vertically, which is okay, but there's a certain format for that too. The other thing is this up here. What you'll see is it will run together, like it'll say crystal elemental, comma, large elemental, comma, neutral. If this gets jacked up at all with different information or different order, that'll also break the import. The other thing that happens a lot is the actions and the traits. So the traits here, this crystal body, that's a trait, it has a period after it, and then the information. Magic resistance, same thing, has a period after it, and then the information. Then it has a divider here, which is this actions. And then here on top is multi-attack. Then there's a slam attack. Here's the crystal shard burst with the recharge, and that's the format it should be in, with the basically the commas or the brackets. And then you have this once per day. So this is basically parentheses, or in this case, you got these here. So that's important. All that little bit of formatting will break it if it's not right. It's mostly the period will be missing, or it'll be a hyphen or a semicolon. Same thing with his actions. You'll see a semicolon after that. No hyphen, no bullet points, nothing. You don't want any of that, because it'll break the import, and then you have to do it over, and it just gets frustrating. So now I'm going to hit import. We'll see if it breaks, because I'm always expecting that. And I know what to look for now, so it's a little easier to manage, but it can really piss you off. So this here looks good. So you can see it's parsed that correctly. It's parsed all that correctly. Looks like the stats are correct, because if it isn't, they'll be in weird order, or they'll be blank. It's got all this stuff in here. It's got its language, CR value, XP, alignment, all that stuff. And then on the back, this is all that stuff that we added. So here's the nice summary that it provides. And then here's all the notes that we put in there for this particular NPC. So that's just one of probably 12. But without explaining it and just having the text in front of me and just copying and paste it, it's really quick. This would probably take me about 30 minutes with tokens and everything. So this is pretty quick. So one more thing I wanted to show you guys before I go is I was showing you guys the information about the environment, and how if you have certain character types in your group, they might have certain knowledge. And then we're even getting into the epilogues, like the crystal's influence, political fallout, mind flayer mechanizations, ecological shifts. You got future adventures, so if you want to continue from there as like a launch point. And then there's some dialogue here. So I really went to town on this. Let's see. There was a dialogue tree and some optional encounters. So a friendly Myconid scout, a rival drow spy, and there's the crystal elemental. So those are kind of in addition to the adventure. But I have that information there in case you want to, get into it. So here was the crib sheet. Crystal Cavern Origins. This is expanded lore. So it's formed by a convergence of tectonic activity and magical energies millennia ago. The unique properties of the crystals are due to exposure to faint, lingering energies similar to the Flayers rest, which is what the Underdark is powered by. There's the Mindseer Overlord, what his thing is. Let's see, where did that go? So I have these dialogue areas where if you had run into these individuals or the NPCs, you have some information or dialogue that you can use. Like if you overhear what they're saying, or you eavesdrop on them, or you talk to them, you have stuff ready to go that are kind of in line with the adventure. You're not always going to be able to write ahead of time, but when you have content, it helps jar or jog your memory, so it's easier to run this. So, for instance, here's an elaborate but kind of dialogue that you might come across when you on your current mission. It might be concerns, finds, or complications that these dwarves are going through before you even meet them. So the Duergar dialogue is guard conversation. So guard one says Azagal bandalala, it has like some gibberish here that's dwarven, but then the translation says Azagal, watch closely, keep your eyes open. So you have like the dwarven language part, and then you have like the translation. So if you really wanted to role play it up, you have all that there. And they're talking about the crystals and the mission that they're on. And you might overhear a conversation that says, "Did you see the runes we uncovered? Old gnomish work, but twisted somehow." And the second Duergar says, "Aye, the crystals there, they sing when you're not looking. Drives a dwarf mad, it does." So you kind of get the impression that these dwarves are being impacted by the crystals, which is part of the plot. But you get the idea that this is something that you can add in to make your adventures more interesting and lore friendly, and not just a bunch of randomness. So, for instance, what is this here? Okay, so this is more lore and potential dialogue based on the racial composition of the party. So this is what I was saying about the drow. They might, if you have a drow player, they might know about an old drow expedition, and they find the markings in the caverns. They're aware of the Duergar enslavement practices and their impact on Underdark politics, and they understand how different Underdark races might use the cavern's resources. So these are things that you may or may not use. Who knows? And then here's the puzzles. So we talked about the crystal bridge, and this is the information for that. And I actually had the stat blocks made for this. Instead of just doing it like this, I actually have stat blocks. So anything that requires like a check or a save or anything, it'll be in stat block information and then pinned to the map. So if you need to spring the trap, it's right there. You don't have to wing it. You can just use a stat block and drag and drop the damage and the saving throws. So if like the poison dart trap, it describes it. It has a dexterity saving throw that you can drag onto your players, and then the damage. So that's kind of a good thing to have for environmental challenges and puzzles, or more like traps and stuff. So this is just things that you can do to make your adventure much more enriched, much more interesting, and much more playable, and not just a bunch of scraps of notes. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but if you want to have fun, spend the time up front. Don't try to develop your campaign all the time in the middle of the game. It's really hard to do that. I mean, you can do it. You can wing it sometimes, which is fine. That's part of the game, but always constantly having to look things up and dig through all the books and stuff just takes forever. So this is just a suggestion. You guys can tell me to shut up or screw off or whatever, but I'm just letting you know that Fantasy Grounds does a good job organizing notes, so you might as well use that capability. There's some people that kind of run off the seat of their pants, and they'll have like 20 books open, and then they'll be digging around looking for that one rule or that one part that you want. It doesn't work very well, especially if it's in a paid game or a short one-shot. You kind of want everything kind of laid out if you can. You're not going to be able to lay every single possibility out, but you can do a little bit better job and do a little bit more prep and put a little bit more thought into your games, especially if it's your own, right? I mean, Wizards of the Coast stuff, who cares, right? You just run it the way they said. I don't care. I might add a little bit to it to make it more fun, but by the time I run it, already 100 people already know how it ends and how it starts and who's in it and all that stuff. I just get tired of that consumerism, and I just want to get more into making my own stories again and using Fantasy Grounds to help you do that, and generative AI tools. So hopefully that's enough for you guys to chew on for a while. I've done a lot of videos on AI. This happens to be Claude 3 Anthropic, an AI tool that I think is superior in writing text and formatting and such. This does a really good job. Like you make these stat blocks in a minute. Like it's just really quick, and it once it understands the output that you want, it's a lot easier to use. And I believe at some point in the future, there'll be tools out there available for us where you can just ask it and it's just going to plop it out. You just copy and paste it. You don't have to hardly do anything. But we'll see. Anyways, take care, folks. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.